Hi there, and welcome to Gender Speaker Live, my new weekly show on gender issues here on a Wednesday. This is the 1st in October. Really busy week this week because it's the Professional Speaking Association convention. But we shall have a look at some gender issues now. So let's get started. So I've been looking through the papers and looking through the online news feeds about transgender issues, and the anti-trans campaign just keeps on popping up all the way. And it strikes me when I look at these just how much the truth gets twisted. So I want to have a look at that today and just try and see if I can help to try and just show. I keep hearing lots of arguments about no platforming people. And I'll be honest, I'm really opposed to that. I always think, if somebody's got silly ideas, ridiculous ideas, giving them a platform is sometimes the quickest way to shut them up. Because once people hear some things that they have to say, they look at it and think, oh, this is actually crazy. And sometimes, people have things we need to hear. Both sides of any argument need to hear these things. So I'm going to try to provide a balanced view, if I can, in the way that I go through this. So a couple of things that came up in the press that I noticed today. Now, this is the first one from last week, I think this was, but Petra de Sutter has been appointed Deputy Prime Minister of Belgium. And she is a trans woman. Now, this is a little bit different to the UK Deputy Prime Minister. In Belgium, they've been struggling to find a government because they have lots of parties. Nobody has an overall majority by any stretch of imagination. So there are about 4, 5, 6 parties. I think there's actually 7 together now, 6 or 7. And Petra is the leader of the Green Party there and is one of the deputy prime ministers who's come together in a coalition government. But hey, it makes her one of the most powerful trans women in the world, and the highest ranking, if you like, in the world. And it shows that in Europe, the issue of being trans isn't an issue. Now, of course, 2016 was the Brexit debate. And it's interesting that much of the anti-trans rhetoric that's been pumped out into and the very toxic debates that have been going on have happened since 2016. And I'm going to look at something around that. The big voice in the sort of anti-trans arena is unquestionably JK Rowling. She wrote a letter in the press or on her website, which got published all over the place, partly because she had come out in support of a trans, of someone who basically had been sacked for being transphobic, refusing to accept and acknowledge that someone had changed gender. And I think this is where the start of this battle starts to come along. If I change gender and I say that's it, I now use the title Ms. I prefer the pronouns she and her. To be honest, now I'm pretty much moving towards non-binary, so they, them, and theirs. But I'm happy with she. I prefer not he and him. So I've sort of said no. I don't want to be identified as male. That's part of my decision as to the way I want to be referred. Now, if you're having a conversation with somebody about me, I have no idea what you're going to say about me. You might say it. Some people do. I consider that a bit rude, but that's the world. If you're doing it in relationship to me, if you're actually introducing me as a speaker, then I'm going to tell you what pronouns to use and which ones I prefer. And if you don't use those, I consider that to be well, if it's accidental once or twice, fine. But if you keep on doing it, that's harassment. And I'm going to challenge you over that. And that's just simply, I don't want to be ridiculed and humiliated in front of an audience. So I want you to use appropriate pronouns. And think about this. If I stand up on a stage and I am introduced and the audience sees me dressed in female clothing, looking female, walking on the stage, and somebody says, "Oh, please welcome him." Can you see that how that is an uncomfortable position? It's put me at a difficult position before I even start to speak. Oh, I know when I open my mouth and start speaking, everybody's going, "Oh gosh," but I deal with that, and I can handle that. So anyway, let's just have a little bit more of a look at what happened. An organisation that runs a Ripple of Hope award had awarded it to J K Rowling, and then had come out in opposition to what Rowling had said. So she wrote a letter saying, "I'm returning the award. I can't really support an award that doesn't support that she totally disagrees with." The problem when I read through her letter, and I'm not going to go through the whole of it, it's available if you want to get the whole of it, it's on her website, but a couple of statements which I saw, and I just pulled these out, and these are just extracts, so they're slightly out of context, but, I'm not misusing them. And she was talking that people have expressed concerns, reference to huge numbers of people, but we don't know how many, have expressed serious concerns about the impact of gender identity theory on vulnerable adolescents and on women's rights. Well, yeah, we know that that's the context and where it's in, but gender identity theory. There's no gender identity theory. We're discussing gender identity and the issue of gender identity on how I feel about my gender identity. All of a sudden, it's being put into the context of being a theory. And this kind of thing has been happening all the time, with people taking statements and the sort of the transgender rhetoric, the transgender trend, and all of these types of things suggest that somehow this is some crazy theory invented by someone that's now being foisted upon an unsuspecting public. It's not. We've been dealing with gender identity issues for hundreds of years. We have trans people going back thousands of years. This isn't something new. It's something that's been around for a long, long time. So another comment in the letter, proper explanation of the factors leading to proper explanation of the gender dysphoria is a condition. It's in the American Psychiatric Society Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, version 5. It is a clear condition. It's not a mental health illness. It's not something that somebody can say. It's in the directory because it is a condition that people have, gender dysphoria, an extreme level of discomfort with your body and with your identity as gender assigned at birth, sex assigned at birth. So this is another thing that starts to suggest that somehow this is something which is not being properly looked at, not being properly explored, well, I'm sorry, we have 100 years of documented study and research into gender dysphoria. It's only just been called gender dysphoria, but it was called gender identity disorder. It's been called transvestism, transex. All of these terms are there. It's a topic that's been studied considerably, as has homosexuality, as has lesbianism. So let's not try and do that one. Dismisses the question of whether psychological therapy might help to relieve or resolve gender dysphoria. When you read this and some of the rest of it, it's very, very clear what's being said there. This is a mental illness, and we're not considering the possibilities of treating it as a mental illness, and that somehow some kind of mental health therapy might help to cure people. What do we call that? It's called conversion therapy. And it's banned in this country. It's banned in America. The experiences of conversion therapy are pretty horrific. If you've ever seen Clockwork Orange, the film by Stanley Kubrick, which he actually banned from being shown because of the numbers of people who've actually tried to live it out, you'll see that the lead character in Clockwork Orange had to undergo conversion therapy, electroconvulsive therapy designed to turn his mind back to being a normal, natural citizen. Conversion therapy is used, and it can be quite extreme, using drugs, electroconvulsive therapy, constant reinforcement of another idea. It's all about brainwashing somebody into believing that they are not what they feel they are, that there's something else. And it's worked on the principle that somehow the mind has gone wrong, so what we've got to do is shift it, change it. And it's banned because it's really, really brutal, and it actually has huge, huge long-term side effects. There are people who believe they can cure homosexuality. And by the way, they're all involved in this anti-trans thing as well. Anything to do with the Clark Institute in Canada has something to do. Anything to do with Ray Blanchard and Michael Bailey, and these names keep on turning up in the anti-trans, in the books I'm reading that are anti-trans. I read this stuff. Need to understand what people are saying, and understand where they're getting it wrong. And it's always the same argument, every single one. Everybody's being schooled in the same arguments. But there are 500,000 trans people in this country, approximately. We don't know the exact truth because, well, actually, most of them keep it secret. Most of them you'll never know. Some will transition. They will actually undergo complete medical transition. Some will just transition by looking the other gender. And they will go into stealth. That is, that they will live their lives in their acquired gender, or they will just secretly be trans, but just make a decision that they can't do anything about it. And this happens to a lot. If you've got a male body and you're 6'6" and built like a tank, there is no way you're going to be able to pass easily as a woman. And so therefore a lot of people just think, oh, well, I'll just cross-dress for fun. Just go out, on the weekends. They find a way to cope. It's a condition that a lot of people have. 500,000 we think is the number. I can tell you, however, only 30,000 in this country have ever undergone any form of clinical therapy or medical treatment. Most people do not. And even the ones that have clinical therapy, for a large number of those, it's simply counselling. They don't have a lot of treatment. Not that many go through any form of medical treatment. And this is where we get some of the other things, because there's a lot of stuff about the huge increase in referrals to the Tavistock Clinic. Now, this is young people being referred. And this has become part of the centre of this whole debate on the anti-trans movement, that a lot of these children grow up just to be normal lesbian and gay, which is okay. But it's not okay to be trans. Why have we got this obsession? There's an organization called the LGBT Alliance. And the LGBT Alliance is nothing to do with a friendly organization for lesbian, gay, and bisexual people. That isn't their focus. They're not supporting LGBT people. This is an alliance of LGBT people against trans. And that's a battle we've been seeing for the last 50 years. There are groups of people within the lesbian, gay, bisexual community who find trans people uncomfortable, don't like to be connected and associated with them. So let's keep it out. When I went to university, I went to the Student Union LGB conference. And I was surprised that it wasn't LGBT, because nearly everybody else was. Certainly at the university, at Hull University, we had an LGBT campaign. So when I went to the national campaign and found that it was just LGB, I challenged it. And immediately somebody threatened to evict me from the conference. And they wanted to evict me from the conference because they said, if I am trans, then if I prefer a relationship with a woman, then that's fine. But if I prefer a relationship with a man, then I'm heterosexual because I'm trans, and therefore not welcome at the LGB conference because I have to actually want a same-sex relationship. I don't know. I got into a huge big battle. I said, no, I'm bisexual, we'll do with that. But being trans wasn't enough to allow me to be at the LGB conference, despite the fact I was representing the students in the LGBT campaign in Hull. I took exception to it. I started a political campaign, and 2 years later got a vote at the conference to change it to the LGBT campaign. But I was quite shocked to find that this political battle against me, because there were groups of people who really did not like trans people and didn't want trans people actually to be much involved. They're in a minority, to be honest. So we look at the huge change in referrals to the Tavistock Clinic. Tavistock Clinic is the clinic that looks after young people, people under the age of 19 who are being referred for support and help. In fact, it might be 18, but I think they take them up to 19. And here's the problem. 2009, there were 77 referrals. By 2019, that had gone to 2,590. And you're right, that's a big, huge increase. So why would there such an increase? Well, the first reason for this increase was the fact that up until actually 2012, the clinical lead who ran the Tavistock Clinic was vehemently opposed to any form of treatment for young people other than basic counselling. Well, that wasn't really going to help. For a lot of them, they can get counselling locally. They can go to CAMS service. They can go to a whole bunch of different services. They didn't need to go all the way down to London, and London was the only place there was a clinic. There wasn't a clinic for young people in Leeds or in Exeter or Bristol or Notting or any, all the places where there were clinics for adults. There weren't clinics for children. You had to go to Leeds. Getting a referral wasn't that easy. So they got one a week, people going in there, a little bit more. If you look at the trajectory, this started to increase, and it started to increase more in 2012 when Polly Carmichael took over and changed the policy. Kids were being taken to America to get treatment because they couldn't get any treatment here. But when everything shifted and it all started to be getting proper help at the Tavistock Clinic, and they opened up a clinic in Leeds, and they opened up a clinic, satellite clinics elsewhere. And then all of a sudden, it was much easier for parents to try and get their children to some kind of help. And the charity that had been set up, Mermaids, by Susie Green, whose daughter had transitioned and had to go to America to get help, was obviously pointing people in the direction saying, yeah, the Tavistock Clinic can now help. So all of a sudden there was information going out there that there was proper help, that there was access to hormone blockers at puberty. All right, and there's a big argument about whether they're right or wrong. I'm not going to get into that one today. There is quite a lot of research, quite a lot of medical information, quite a lot of evidence about the use of hormone blockers, which allows children to develop and grow without developing secondary sexual characteristics, which can be so distressing that it can lead to self-harm, even suicide. Now, what's not so clear is why there's been a big shift in girls defining as trans men. And we've got a whole thing of lots of girls suddenly coming out, and is it a fad that's happening at school? The thing we don't realize is that when you look at 2,950, oh my God, that's an awful lot. That's through a year. So yeah, let's be clear, it's not quite so much. And it's out of a population in this country of 12 million children. So we are talking about a tiny, minuscule percentage. And it's quite likely that some of them are not trans. And when they get to the Tavistock Clinic, they are not going to be put on hormones straight away, despite what people are saying. There's a very rigorous process of assessment. And to be perfectly honest now, if you want to get to the Tavistock Clinic, it's going to take you 3 or 4 years even to get an appointment. It isn't something that's going to happen easily. Just as with the gender identity clinics, 5 years to start getting onto the care path. This is not something that's going to easily happen anywhere. And what's been happening, therefore, is that all of this debate that has been scaring the medical professions because they've been threatened with being sued. I see in the press again today a trans man or ex-trans man, somebody who was female, transitioned to male, went to the Tavistock Clinic, has now decided that was all a big mistake. It's your fault. You shouldn't have allowed me to do it. Oh. People go to these clinics adamant that they're going to want to be put through, wanting it all to be done overnight, happen now. If they've got money, they can probably push the agenda by going privately and get it quicker. Bad mistake. I strongly agree. It should be at least 2 years of hard work to get through this process. You've got to know that this is what you really want to do. This is not a journey you can come back from. Okay, coming back is basically just as difficult as going to. You transition medically from one gender to another and then decide you made a mistake. You're going to have to transition back the same way. Nobody wants that to happen. The medical profession don't want it to happen. Trans people don't want it to happen. And the truth is, it doesn't happen very often. But sometimes it happens. What do? Do you stop all transition because a small percentage, 1 or 2%, make a mistake? Do you make the 98% suffer in order to prevent somebody going through? Do you make it tougher and tougher for someone to go through? Well, you're doing it anyway. That's what's been happening. So these are the things that aren't being given. The other thing I've noticed is that the sharp increase took place between 2015 and 2018. It's tapered off now, and it's suddenly shot up, a bit like we've seen with the coronavirus charts. 2015 was the tipping point. That was the point at which all of a sudden transgender issues suddenly became big news. We had Caitlyn Jenner came out 2015. There were actors and actresses suddenly all over the screen. There were the Danish Girl was being produced. Suddenly transgender was big news. Suddenly it was all there. We had trans people on documentaries, on films, on TV shows, everywhere. Trans was just everywhere in America and in here, in this country. So it was everywhere about, and so it was a topic people were talking about. So suddenly people who were uncomfortable with their gender, not understanding why they felt the way they did, were suddenly able to see other people, and especially trans men who had never been in the news. Suddenly we were seeing them. My transsexual summer, we were seeing trans men undergoing transition in front of us on a TV program. And I think it's all, when you start to put that into context, you can see why the shift started to take place. And maybe there is some encouragement. Maybe there is a tendency for people to fall into a group that they feel comfortable with, and therefore suddenly want to transition. Transitioning isn't all it's cracked up to be. I have friends who have been permanently disabled as a result of going through surgery. I also think that there's a huge, big problem when we look at the whole area of stereotyping, gender stereotyping. And there's been a bit of a battle with this from feminist groups. Somebody who was a man suddenly transitions to be female, and the first thing they do is dress in an extraordinarily stereotypical manner. Lots of makeup, short skirts, high heels, glitzy glam. I did that as well. Okay. I had fun with it. But I've settled into it now, and I'm more comfortable with who I am. Initially there was this rush, and I think it's like, I needed to experience that sort of, I needed to experience what 16, 18, 20-year-old girls experience, going out, dressing up, being sassy, flirting, and that was all good fun. Found safe places to do it, where people didn't mind a 50-year-old dressed like an 18-year-old. But stereotyping was a challenge. Now, one of the things I'm seeing, it's gender stereotyping I'm seeing is a bigger and bigger issue. I actually quite agree with some of the feminists. I think that shift into completely being totally ultra feminine from being often ultra masculine, because often people have been ultra masculine to disguise the fact they're trans and then shift to this very ultra feminine position, which often doesn't work for them. And it takes a few years to settle in and find a style that works. But what if gender didn't matter? What if nobody cared whether I wore a dress or what what kind of top I wore or what kind of neck it was, and whether I wore nail polish and makeup and had my hair long and dyed. What if nobody cared? What if that didn't matter? What if I could just be me, be who I felt? Now, maybe we would have a lot of people not needing to go through complex and difficult surgery. Maybe people would still want to. But I think there's a lot of pressure on people to conform, and that's not helped us with this whole trans debate. But at the same time, what do trans people want? What are we actually looking for? What's? I think we've got to look at some of the things. We've got this argument, and back to the J K Rowling's thing, the voice of TERFs or gender critical feminists is not being heard. Everything TERFs is a slur. It's not trans exclusionary radical feminists. It was a term developed in the 70s to distinguish those radical feminists who were opposed to trans people and those who actually supported trans people. There was a festival in America, the Michigan Women's Festival, which excluded trans people and was allowed to do so. And there are a few other organizations that had specifically said, no, trans women can't come here because you're still men. And that's still that same argument from the 1970s that we're still playing around with here. Well, the Gender Recognition Act reform has been shelved. So to say that the voice of TERFs, gender critical feminism, is not being heard is rubbish. It's definitely being heard. I think Liz Truss, the Minister for Women and Equalities, is quite clearly a supporter of their views and has just scrapped it. But what are the consequences of exclusion? What would happen if we did exclude trans women from access to women's space, from accessing female toilets? And it's really trans women where this is about. That there's not the same pressure towards trans men for saying, well, trans men shouldn't be allowed to go into men's toilets. Nobody really has been arguing that. It's all about trans women using female toilets, using female changing rooms, accessing female space. And it's all this big argument that there are these sacrosanct female spaces in which men should never be allowed, and anybody born a man is always a man, so they can never come in. Well, most of the trans women I know who want to, for example, access a rape crisis centre do so because they have been raped. If somebody transitions, they're still vulnerable. They're still subject to it. In fact, it's even worse, because very often somebody finds out that they're trans and they find themselves being beaten up and abused, badly beaten up in the street just because, you tried to trick me. I see in America we've had now 31 trans women that have been brutally murdered just because they're trans. The numbers in Brazil, you don't want to know. That's over 200. People are brutally killed, brutally beaten up, murdered, hurt, just because they're trans. And what do trans people want? I just want to get on with life. It's as simple as that. I want to just live my life. I don't want to be noticed as I walk down the street. If I walk into the toilets, I don't want to be noticed. I'm going to make sure I'm not. How do we police changing it so this exclusion? Does that mean we have to have somebody on the toilets to check what my physical body is before I go in, for me to show my birth certificate to allow me to use the toilets? Absolutely crazy. And that's the consequences. That's the potential. But what it also does mean is it puts into the hands of ordinary people this belief that they now have the right to challenge me as to whether I can access some space, because who's going to police it? There aren't enough police to manage the current crime rate, let alone trying to add it to that. They're having enough trouble trying to determine whether you've got 7 or 6 people in your group. Sometimes you have to look at things and think there's no way to police this. Just look at it reasonably. As a trans woman, I want to enter a space, use it. I'm going to go to the toilets, do my business, and come out. If I need support and access that can come from what are primarily women's spaces like rape crisis centres, I need to be able to access them so I can get the support. Otherwise, I'm probably not even going to go near them. So there we are. A little bit of a rant today, but it just struck me when we can basically, when we can see a trans woman elevated to the status of deputy prime minister of a country in a powerful position like that, and then I look back and I find that Anthony Armstrong and Ben Miller have now backed and supported JK Rowling without really understanding the implications, and looking at the list of people that are supporting her letter. They're very far right, they're extremists, and they have a history of transphobic abuse on Twitter and Facebook and elsewhere. Anyway, if you want to find a little bit more about trans and non-binary inclusion, doing a workshop 20th of October. You'll find the details down below in the show notes here. And other than that, join me on Sunday when I'll be doing another show about LGBT history. Thank you for joining me here today. I'm glad you were able to be here. I look forward to seeing you on Sunday. For now, take care.